Welcome to the call, Colin. It is my pleasure to have Colin Turner on the call today. He's the author of Into the Open Economy and the F-Day, the Second Dawn of Men. He's the founder of ShareBay and HonorPay, among other projects. Colin has given many talks on the topic of an open access economy and continues to educate the public on the paradigm shift that we need to create a free world. Thanks again, Colin, for being here today on the call. And could you explain to us what is an open access economy and how did you get to that realization?
Well, thanks, Guillermo. Yes, open access economy is, it sounds complicated, but really it's quite a simple idea. And the idea is that we put first the idea that everyone should have access to at least the basic necessities of life. So hence the term open access. That term is borrowed from a scientific, shall we say, a scientific movement to actually release all academic papers for public access. So the idea of open access to research, which often isn't the case where you have to pay for scientific research. Anyway, we've just expanded that term to include open access to everything, not just scientific research, but to the basic necessities of life, as in food, shelter, clothing, energy, heating, etc., etc. So the principle behind it is then that we begin with the concept of providing free access of basic necessities to people, and from that point, then we try to figure out how we do it from there. In our current society, we kind of have things backwards a little bit. We have this idea that we must we must have a market, and we must create a lot of prosperity and growth in that market. And by doing so, then by creating this much wealth, then wealth will eventually trickle down to everyone, and then everyone will be able to buy the necessities of life by doing that. I mean, that does work to a point, but of course it has lots of problems associated with it. And that is, not everyone is able to access it. Probably at least a third of the global population don't have that access, and that trickle down theory is not working for them. And of course, then on the other end of things, we have people who make enormous amounts of money and enormous wealth, and become completely disconnected from the rest of society as a result. So this idea of market economics, that we say we'll create as much prosperity as possible, and then the wealth trickles down and other people are able to access things, is really putting it backwards. It's because it's kind of saying that access to things will be accidental later on. That's really right. What that's predicated on. Whereas we're kind of saying, well, let's turn that around and say, well, okay, the first thing is that we got to have access to things, and then we can figure out about prosperity and anything else that happens later on. But first, we've really got to provision for everybody, rather than think about creating prosperity. And I suppose the more cynical side of me would think that this idea of trickle-down economics is really something that has invented by capitalists, I suppose, because it seems to be very much biased in their favor. So these guys, whoever have the money, or the rich guys, this is kind of a way of saying, well, look, we'll look after ourselves, we make ourselves richer, and then the poor will pick up the crumbs later. That's basically, it will
trickle down, right?
Yeah, trickle down economics. Yeah, so exactly. Yeah, and as we know, that doesn't work, and lots of people are left out of the thing, and it also creates a huge competitive culture, which is entirely unnecessary at this stage. And of course, as you know, if anyone has seen the likes of the Venus Project or the Zeitgeist movement, we already have tons of great technology out there, which really leaves the whole trading and market economics theory really in tatters, really, because we don't actually have to really compete for scarce resources anymore, because it's really easy to make things generally now, much easier than it was like 50 or 100 years ago. There's just no comparison, you know. You can
and I would like to talk about that for sure in a few minutes, but it's so ingrained in us, this idea, right, since we're like little kids, that there's this thing called the economy, right? Instead of backwards say, okay, let's just provide for the basics first. So was there like a moment in your life, like an aha moment, where all of a sudden like, oh, what are we doing? This is kind of backwards, right? Even though most people think that way, to me also it's backwards. Like, why don't we reverse engineer the basics first? Was it like a moment like that, or was it just like a process of
Yeah,
experience? And
I would say many moments like that. Of course, I mean, as somebody who has struggled with money for many times in my life, of course, it leads you to question the thing, the system, the way we operate.
uh-huh.
And it's never been because I was idle. You know, I was never one to be lying around and doing nothing. And so, I mean, oftentimes I would be so busy with whatever work I was doing, whether it was volunteering or creating something or building something, and yet it was always really hard for me to convert that into payment and money from
Mm-hmm.
other people. So it always caused me to question that, why am I putting in so much effort here all the time, and yet I'm not making money from it, and yet people who I know do very little effort, and they make a lot of money doing something. So obviously, yeah, it's at a point in many points in my life, it seemed that it was just imbalanced some way, that the effort and the creativity that you output does not equal the payment that you get. So yeah, I thought that was inherently unfair, really.
Right, but we're told, right, at least here in America where I live, that everybody has a good chance and you just need to work harder, and all these things. And if you're not making enough money, it's because you're not working hard enough, basically. But
Yeah.
you're not bringing enough value to society, when I think is not the case. Like you were talking about, how many times you
Mm-hmm.
were working hard and providing good value, and you
Yeah,
were not
yeah, I
like
mean,
getting enough, right, to live a
yeah.
good life.
Absolutely. Well, it's not entirely untrue either. Obviously, you do put a certain amount of effort in, you will earn money from that, but it's not absolutely true that the amount of effort that you put out will equal the amount of money that you take back. That's completely not true. And of course, many people who are very wealthy and successful were born into wealthy and successful backgrounds. There's
Thank you.
all kinds of studies that have shown that American citizens born in particular postcodes, their future is pretty much already mapped out for them, even from the day that they're born. There's a huge amount of people who live in wealthy backgrounds. They become wealthy and successful themselves. And similarly, people who are born in poor areas basically tend to remain poor for most of their lives. So,
Right.
barring some exceptions, probably maybe 20% of an exception in either case, but generally, the way what you're born into predicts basically how successful you will be later on.
Yeah, and it seems like they use these examples of people like, you see, he was born in poverty and he was a big success later, but those are the outliers, right? But they use those examples, in my opinion, to justify that
It's
so many
exactly
other
right.
people are.
It's exactly right. And you look at, like, for example, Hollywood movie culture, you will always see examples of people beating the odds,
Right.
like people who are born in the streets in the Bronx or something like that, and they turn out to be millionaires, billionaires, or successful celebrities or something later on. And it's always like selling the dream. You're like, this guy, they really, or the girl, they tried really hard, and they made it, and all this sort of stuff. So it's kind of like a little bit of a lie, really, because it's very much the exception.
Right.
Most people try and they don't get there, of course.
Right. Like if there was nothing else, right? If there was nothing else that we could do, well, if those are my only chances, I'll take that dream, as my last opportunity. But the big lie here is like, that's not the only thing that we can do. And that's what you're talking about, right? There's so many things that we could
Mm-hmm.
reorganize society.
Yep.
And you talk about trade a lot in your talks and in your articles. So could you talk about how trade, because I love this um, phrase that I read on one of your articles: trade erodes the ability to trust. And to me,
Mm-hmm.
trust is huge. It's a big deal. And
Yep.
if you don't mind, just talk about that, please.
That's really it's probably the crux of the whole issue, the problems with trade and the possibilities of what we could do if we didn't trade.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, as you mentioned there, another another points there, we have been sort of indoctrinated to a large degree to think that trade is the only way for society to operate, the only way we can operate. There's all kinds of sayings like you don't get something for nothing, or there's no such thing as a free lunch. These are sort of stuff that
right.
are permeated in our culture to more or less reinforce the idea that you must trade, you must exchange like for like in order to progress. But of course, this isn't true. It's exceptional actually in nature. That doesn't happen. Most species, even symbiotic species, they exchange things purely by accident. It doesn't actually, it's not intentional. But yeah, the idea of trade replacing trust is something that sort of occurred to me a couple of years ago, that generally in our small, friendly or familial circles, we don't generally trade that often. If our brother or sister needs a hand with something, we'll generally go and give them a hand with that, and we're not going to ask for payment. And similarly with close friends. So the reason that happens is because there's a sort of a trusted arrangement there, which more or less implies that, well, look, I help you today, maybe someday later on you're going to help me, or maybe someday later on you'll help this other person who's also in our family, for example. So this is kind of like a bond of trust, basically, between close members of family or close friends, where trade is not really necessary, and because of that trust that exists, that we know that we can reciprocate at other times. And obviously, in the wider world, we don't have that big familial bond with obviously the hundreds and thousands of people that we encounter. So this is why we moved to trade with other people, because it kind of removes that need to trust. Because obviously, when you're dealing with a lot of strangers, it's not that easy to trust a lot strangers, because they can trick you, they can take your things, or they can make you work and never reciprocate. So that's why the trade sort of thing has kind of appeared, because with large groups of people, like big villages, big communities, that familial trusting bond was a difficult thing to maintain. And one of the problems then is that when you have that trading system in place, is what happens is that you start to lose the ability to trust people, because it's so easy just to trade, to say, well, look, I'll pay you for this thing, you pay me for that thing, and is you almost to the point that you don't even have to have any sort of relations with that person at all. You know, you don't even have to speak. You just basically pay the money and that's it. I mean, you go online shopping now, you can just buy that thing for $50, and you never meet a person, they never meet you. Nothing happens. It's just a completely cold trade. And this, of course, has the byproduct of starting to erode trade, or erode a trust, or eroding our ability to trust, because we don't need to do it. So we don't exercise the feeling of risking trust.
The muscle of trust.
Yeah. I mean, when you trust someone that you don't know, you're taking a chance, you're taking a risk, because maybe they won't reciprocate, maybe they're going to trick you, maybe they're going to hurt you somehow. So we lose that ability to trust when we don't have to do it. Then it becomes that we say, well, look, it's just easier just not to trust anybody, and I'll just keep trading. And of course, that's fine if you have loads of money, but of course, if you don't have loads of money, that's not fine, you know. And you either struggle with money, or you have to find other ways to share goods and services with other people. So yeah, trade definitely is a way of replacing trust. But when you trade over and over, then it erodes your ability to actually trust other people. And that's a big problem. And I think that's pretty self-evident in society now, that trust is a huge problem with people. People basically are very mistrustful of others.
Right. And like you said, like the fact that we don't know somebody doesn't mean that we have to be distrustful. We're just used to it, and that's how we operate. But that comes at a really high price, in my opinion. Sure, in the short term, maybe we are like, getting away with things more like in an orderly way, but how many opportunities are lost because we don't trust? And how many synergies? And if we were to change the culture, and I think that's one of the things that you're trying to do, and modestly, and also trying to do the same thing with my website and this interview and everything, is to change the culture where instead of mistrust most people, could we trust most people? And I'm talking about businesses and all kinds of relationships. But right now, you look at the state of the world, and it's like even countries are like still thinking about going to war and all these things. Like that is primitive thinking, you know. We're only in the same place. Well, no, we should like organize and trust and build from there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And of course, war is the ultimate expression of that mistrust. It's like, we're afraid of the Russians, we're afraid of the Chinese, but that's ridiculous. It's like, it's just people are just removed by ideology. But, you get these people in the same room. I mean, they're going to, and you get them to give them a questionnaire, they're going to agree on 90% of everything, probably, just a few small things here and there. And yeah, of course, war
99% of people are good, or most of them. Could we agree on that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But of course, it's okay it's understandable that people can be cautious as well, because you can't just put yourself out there, just throw yourself into the world and be super generous and super kind with everyone. There has to be a balance. If you do that, you're kind of going to destroy yourself probably quite soon. You're going to burn yourself out. I know people who have done that, who have launched themselves into sort of a gifting sort of mindset, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work now because the way we are. The only way to actually get to that point really is incrementally. It's just little by little by little by little. And that's really what I'm hoping to achieve with things like ShareBay, which maybe we can talk about later.
Yes,
but the idea is that.
Why don't you tell us about ShareBay right now?
Well, ShareBay is pretty much exactly as it sounds. It's a site like eBay, but it's for sharing goods and services. So everything on there is free, freely provided by other members. We have just about 2,500 members at the moment. And lots of people basically sharing goods and services, in many cases, things that they don't use anymore. But in other cases, people are offering land for use and accommodation to people, or lifts and stuff like that. It's still quite a young network, but it's very promising. We have a lot of good people on there who are basically sharing goods and services, basically. We had quite a lot of activity in Oregon, I think it was, in a city in Oregon. There was we got a hub of it. I mean, so we have 2,500 members, which is still very small but very
promising, like you said.
Yeah, exactly. And the idea is that it's we're not trying to change the world overnight. The idea is we're just trying to introduce this kind of behavior between strangers. So everyone on there is obviously a stranger to each other. And the idea is that we promote that people will share goods and services with other strangers. And the site affords a kind of a protection in that everyone's transaction with other people is logged. So if I give something to you, then it will be logged on the ShareBay that I gave something to you. And that
builds a reputation in a way.
Yeah, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean any. It's no actual intrinsic value that it says that. It just means that that's a log that happened. So that means that later on, somebody else maybe wants to share something with me. Then they can look down and see what have my activities been doing. What have I given to the network as well? So the idea is that it's a reciprocal network, but not directly. So if you give something to me, I don't have to give something back to you. I can give something back to somebody else, and maybe they can give something back to you. So it's a kind of like what we call an implicit trade system. It's not explicit trade. It's not direct trade. It's like an implied trade around the thing. So,
but everyone can see what that person has been doing, and they can decide if it's a good move. To.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's
great.
I think it's great potential. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm very excited about it. We're working on actually on an update of that at the moment, hoping to release that the end of this month. But yeah, it's reputation based, and reputation is important. It will be important. Um, Even though I have met with some resistance from people who say, well, look, it shouldn't be about reputation, you know, because that's kind of the way it was. But we can't avoid looking for somebody's reputation, looking to see if somebody is reputable or trustworthy. It's just, we're just hardwired for that. And it's senseless to actually pretend that doesn't exist, you know? So
Right.
that's why we're putting in the reputation score thing. So people can see how active people have been on the network. So it helps people to make informed choices.
Yeah, I think at this point in history, at least, reputation is still a good idea. You know, maybe in the future when everybody's like in the idea of cooperation and giving and all those things are so ingrained in us, then, you know, it will be like, what, reputation? Like, I trust everybody or whatever, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Another kind of goes with things, you know, the values, you know, that we're talking about. Another great idea that I love that I got from your articles is this, that there is no system. We are the system. So if you could talk about that, I really like it, because most people are always talking about, no, this system is bad, we should change it with that system. And to me, it's like kind of like missing the point, but I'll let you talk about it.
Sure. Yeah, it's a point that I get quite a lot of resistance from people for, and I suppose it's people make the mistake as to what the system is. People identify the system with like government control systems, banks, and laws and stuff like that. But for me, those things are really secondary. They're secondary to the way that we behave, the way that we behave on average as an average human beings. The way that we normally present ourselves to society is basically with fear. We do tend to fear lack, and we fear loss of status and stuff like that. We have all these kind of built-in psychological quirks, shall we say, as human beings, you know. And what comes from that fear is basically the stuff that the government's laws and banks and debt and all that sort of stuff. It really springs out from that point. Most people I know who are talk about in this sort of post-money space, they really think about it the other way around. They think that the government is the problem, or the billionaires are the problem, or the corporations are the problem, and all we've got to do is just overthrow these guys, seize the means of production, and bring it back to the people, that sort of stuff. And that's really what most people say, and it's a huge percentage of people really believe that. But of course, if you even think about it, if you can consider it for a minute, you know, if you have one really bad actor or really bad politician or bad CEO, when you remove them, I mean, obviously, you know, someone else is just going to fill the position, if not there, somewhere else or whatever. It's like a game of whack-a-mole. You know, you get a couple of bad guys out, and just more bad guys are going to pop up. Because the reason is that the same incentives and the same fears are still in there in society that create those behaviors. So when I talk about the system being us, what I mean is that the system that we see, everything that we observe about society, is really just a pure reflection of how we are collectively as people. It doesn't mean the system is like that because of me or because of you. It means because of all of us collectively. You take all our average behavior, the way we operate as people with other people, then that's the sort of society that stems from that behavior. So if you want to change the system of society, we have to change the behavior of the people. And it's ridiculous to think otherwise, that you can just say, right, we're going to plant a whole new system on top of these people, and they're all going to behave differently. I mean, of course, that's not going to happen. You take like a capitalist country and say, right, we're going to make you communist now, and this is the new template for how you operate,
Right.
or turning communist country into capitalist and turning and trying to force a new methodology on them. But the problem is that you still have the same innate behaviors in all those people. So if you're like a communist guy living in a capitalist country, you're still going to have the same hopes and fears as the capitalist guy living in the communist country. The problem is that everything that's inside of us, and just whatever rules that the government creates, it just forces it to express that in another way. But the inbuilt thing is still there, and it's really it's just so childishly simple, really, that the sum of society is just a sum of how we collectively behave.
Right.
If we are going to act in fear and self-interest, then we will have a society that's fearful and with self-interest.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more, and 100%, 200% agree with you.
Yeah,
and I hear the same conversations, the billionaires we need to get rid of them, or communism, or and even, how many people are on Twitter and like in the circles that we are, relating to many times, talking about capitalism. Mm-hmm. Capitalism is bad, blah, blah, blah. Like, wait a second. This is the example I give. If all the people are like running the capitalistic countries and economics and governments had the mindset of, I always give the same example of Mother Teresa. All of a sudden you put 100,000 Mother Teresas in key positions, and don't you think a Mother Teresa, no matter what is the capitalistic economy, is gonna like take different decisions? At the end of the day, it's like people making decisions. So if she has a choice between cutting this forest to get more wood for the short-term stock market of this company or not, maybe she will not do that. She'll see the big picture, the long term. So at the end of the day, it's just humans making decisions. And that's what we need to go. We need to go into the change in the values, because then they can throw at us any system. It doesn't matter. If I'm, Colin, like looking at you and like care about you, and I relate to you in a way that it's positive, like if you were like a friend or family, it doesn't matter. The system doesn't matter that much. I'm not saying there is no such a thing as a system, but obviously, like you were saying, is so right on the money, in my opinion,
Yeah, it's all about our own internal value system, and that's really the problem. That it's our internal, what we prioritize, what we think is important. And you mentioned about the type of person that sort of operates in society. Now, maybe people like you or me, we may be a little bit more thoughtful. Maybe we're thinking about the big picture, or maybe we're a little bit more compassionate than others. But actually, by and large, most people really just seem to kind of trundle through life with the sort of blinkers on. They don't really think too much about what they're doing or why they're doing it. That's not to say that those are bad people, or it's just that the way that people are just kind of distracted by their own world, and we kind of have to snap out of that. It is really what I'm proposing, and probably what you're proposing, I assume as well, is something that we've never really done before. There are all kinds of evidence of how we used to be more egalitarian in more primitive tribes and that sort of stuff, but that doesn't really translate to big society at large, of thousands and millions of people. So to try and do that, to create this sort of familial, sort of trusting circle, but then do it with millions and billions of people, obviously we haven't done that. But we can use tools like the internet and maybe things like ShareBay to track reputation that can help us with that. So we do have loads of things that we can use, but we have to change our internal value system. And once we can do that, we can tap into that, then we can change this type of economy, for good, for better, because that's what has to happen. There's all these people who are basically trundling through life are just buying things, and they're eating meat, and they're making poor consumer choices that are affecting other parts of the world. And all these things, all that has to change. We have to stop just being only for ourselves. We have to stop that, because there's just too damn many of us. You can't have 8, 9, 10 billion people acting in self-interest, it's already a disaster happening. Yeah, it's a bomb that's slowly exploding. We've already overshot resources like many times a few years ago. So our lifestyle is completely unsustainable. And if you think about the lifestyle of the average American, who are basically, they're like the biggest consumers in the world. I don't know what the figure is now, but their yearly tonnage of consumption is something astronomical. And if you suddenly say, well, look, imagine if all capitalism dreams come true and everyone gets rich, then what's going to happen? We're all going to be living the American lifestyle, extracting all these tons from the environment every year. I mean, that's just a sure disaster. You have like the likes of, you have like you 3 billion plus people in Asia who are like, as Peter Joseph said, who are going around on bicycles. And these guys would love to. These guys would love to be driving a Hummer if they could, and they fucking would. They would. They would. If you give them half a chance, they would be going out. They would be buying Hummers, and they'd be driving around in that. And could you imagine what a catastrophe that would be? So we just it's up to us Westerners, us privileged people, and that we are privileged people, or at least I am. I admit it. But it's up to us to change our value system to say, well, look, the lifestyle that I have, that people I know have, is not sustainable for 9 or 10 billion people. We can't keep doing that. At some point, we have to change the rules, change our focus, and start looking at the bigger picture, not just for ourselves.
Yeah, and that doesn't translate to necessarily living like with less standard of living. I think that's another idea that I like to challenge. It's not like we have to go back to caves or anything. I mean, they're like you said, and you allude to this before, you talk about it a little bit. We have great technologies that could to produce things that don't break and that they will last forever, and to recycle. And I mean, there are so many things. We could still have a great standard of living without compromising maybe in the short term society of the environment.
There's a huge amount we can do, obviously, to improve the products that we make and the products that we buy or use.
Right.
There's a huge amount that we can do, but I don't think we shouldn't fool ourselves that, well, if we just change our business methods, then okay, then everyone can be rich. Then after we can still do that. It brings it so far. You can obviously create better mobile phones. You can create better clothes. You can create better things that don't wear out so well. If you invest more resources and time and skills into making those things, but you have to think that will only get so far, because if everyone in the world still is going to adopt a full Western lifestyle, it's still a huge amount of consumption. So at some point in our history, we have to face the fact that our consumption must reduce. And that means,
in terms of consumption, for sure, in terms of like, how many things we buy, but not in terms of lifestyle. In fact, probably our lifestyle would improve with this type of economy, less stress, more quality time, better foods. The important stuff will be there.
The most important part of that is to actually find other ways of fulfillment and being happy that aren't in buying things all the time, that in consuming things, because there are lots of other activities we can do that are not consumptive, that are that make us happy, and all the evidence is there that we do that. Even just spending time with friends is something that's just it makes us really happy. Those kind of things, be spending time with people and going for walks and meditating. I don't know, stuff like that. That we don't really prioritize. We don't. We don't tend to prioritize those things, but obviously they're free. You're not consuming anything. You're not harming anything at all. And they are ways that provably make people more happy. And at the end of the day, what are we actually trying to achieve here? The idea is, are we trying to just see how much we can consume or how rich we can get? Because at the end of the day, as human beings, we need to think about what's going to make us the most fulfilled, what's going to make us the happiest. And that's not necessarily money and things. And in general, it's not those things. There have been all kinds of studies where it shows the minimum requirements, the minimum salary requirement for achieving the minimal level of happiness, shall we say, after which any money you make more, it makes no difference. I think in the States, they equated it to something like $70,000 a year. That if once you earn $70,000 a year, you're as happy with money as you can possibly be. And anything more than that does not make you any happier at all. So, and $70,000 a year is still a hell of a big salary to a lot of people. And most people don't make that, so that kind of also tells you that, most people are like way below the level of lifestyle required to give them that sort of, that minimal satisfaction in life, So that's, we have to provide the basic necessities for people up to and that, I suppose, that figure or whatever. And then figure out other ways to be happy.
That's kind of the biggest foundation of all, to provide those necessities for everyone.
Yep.
And like you say this also in your articles, like it would take the power that money has right now over people, it would take it away. And when you do that, the sky's the limit, because people then can be more creative. That trust becomes a more reality because they are not like in survival mode. Most people are in survival mode. But once we provide those necessities, and the thing is that we have the technology to do it, right? That's what we were trying to say before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All the technology is there to actually provide for people. Yet we're still making the mistake of trading because we believe that everything is scarce and we have to compete for resources, but we don't need to do that anymore. That's a fallacy. It's completely not true.
Right. Colin, if you had like 3 people that you had their ear, right, and you could talk to them, if you could whisper them something, powerful people, I imagine, in the planet, any person in the planet, who would these 3 people that you would like to maybe talk to about your ideas?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I suppose, influential people. 2 that spring to mind straight away would be maybe Pope Francis and Dalai Lama, for example. Those 2. I mean, I really respect both these men. They're very much in close thinking with the way that I'm thinking, but not to the point that I've reached. But I think that maybe the likes of Pope Francis or Dalai Lama, if they were maybe more exposed and explained the ideas to them, maybe they could warm to it, because it fulfills the sort of wishes that they have, and maybe they just haven't had enough resources to actually think about it that way.
Right, and they have a big audience too, so.
And they have a huge audience, yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, it's, but I mean, it's a third person. I can't think of a third person now offhand. I don't know, maybe Donald Trump or someone ridiculous like that. Maybe just to, he probably doesn't care, and doesn't care what people think anyway. But I mean, it's one thing to explain things and to talk about theories, but of course it's quite another to actually put that into action, put it into practice. And so one of the things that I have is, like, I have the Open Access Economy wiki. It's a website which kind of explains the idea, what it is and how it works. But also ShareBay is a way of trying to put that idea into practice, because at the end of the day, we have to practice it. And that's how we learn. That's how we progress, because there's any amount of wonderful theories and beautiful ways you can describe something, but until you actually put it into real life practice, it's not worth very much, to be honest with you. So
absolutely. Yeah, and I'm going to put the links to these projects on the description of this video. And I wanted to ask you about that. What are the most interesting projects and ideas that are right now occupying your mind? You would like to share those, other than ShareBay? Anything else that is right now you're working on?
Well, I have quite a few projects on the go at the moment. I don't really have too much time to be delving into other people's work. That's not to dismiss anyone else's work at all. It's just that I'm obviously a creative, since I work a lot with stuff my own projects, ShareBay and HonorPay, which is a kind of a similar idea. It's like an award system where you can basically send somebody like a thank you award. It's free to use, and again, it's like a reputation-based system. Another thing at the moment is I wrote a novel a few years ago called F-Day, which is it kind of paints a dramatic realization of how a post-money or an open access economy could come about. I'm actually writing that into a movie at the moment, which is quite exciting. I have a couple of people who are interested in looking at it, who are actually in the business. So that would be really fantastic if we could get something like that into a mainstream cinema. That would be very, very nice. But in terms of other people's projects, I mean, I do follow Peter Joseph, the Zeitgeist movement, quite a lot. I really respect his work. He's done a bunch of movies on or around this topic, the Zeitgeist movies. Other than that, it's not really a whole lot else. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of good things going on. You know, there isn't anything that stands out to me particularly, but there's so many people kind of edging towards this direction. You know, not necessarily post money as I would be, but kind of in that general direction, much more left field than we are, much more about cooperative. You could look about the well-being economy, for example. I like these guys. They're again, they're still within money, still within markets, but talking about prioritizing well-being rather than GDP. That's a good initiative. Donut economics is another similar initiative as well.
Have you heard of the common good economy? That's a pretty good one too.
No, I haven't. No, Common Ground Network, is it?
Common good economy. I think it's in English.
No.
They try to stay inside of your traditional economy, but really giving like completely different variables, where it's not like just profit, but giving like a series of like environmental, society variables where people really see what that company is doing, and then based on that, they should invest or not invest, support that company. I mean, there, like you said, there are many good projects, and that was kind of one of the last questions I wanted to ask you. There are so many good projects, so many good thinkers like you and many others, but it seems like we are a little bit of, disseminated. How can we like bring our energy together? Is there something that we can do to support each other more and stay together more?
It's very simple. We have to. We're in the middle of a sort of an experimentation process at the moment. There's lots of things going on. I'm working on things. Other people are working on things. You're working on your thing. There's lots of things going on, and at some point, all these little experiments will succeed and fail, and they'll coalesce, and we'll start seeing bigger movements coming out of all these little experiments that are going on. And I think that the proof of it, how it will actually start taking shape, will be when people are acting on them, and when they're actually there's a real world effect. You know, I don't think anything can really happen until we stop talking about it and start doing it, basically. So, because it's so easy just to keep talking, and social media lends itself completely to that. In fact, I just deleted my Facebook yesterday because I was just fed up talking about it, and I just want to get on with doing things. And I think other people are at that point as well. Like, I mean, you asked me about good projects. I mean, honestly, I've seen countless good projects from people that I can't name them now, but there's so many good things similar to mine, and maybe more left field or not. And I just think that as soon as action starts happening in one or more of these things, then we'll start to see an evolutionary process of selection, where the good ideas will go forward and the bad ideas will flounder. So I think we're at the start of that, actually. So I'm really optimistic, actually, that this is going to happen in some shape or form. Might not be exactly as I paint it, might not be exactly someone else paints it, but somehow this is going to coalesce into something that's definitely very positive for our future.
Well, thank you so much, Colin, for putting those resources already. I think you're bringing it to a practical level with ShareBay, and HonorPay. Those are practical things. And that, I think you're right. We need to go into action mode too, and see where we go from there. And thank you for your time today. It was wonderful to talk to you. And
you, Guillermo.
Where can people follow you? I know you just deleted your Facebook account, but how can we follow you a little bit?
I have a blog that I write to occasionally. It's colinrturner.com. And when you can Google Colin R. Turner, you'll find.
Yeah, I'll put the link on the description.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I found you on Twitter, so don't delete that account. You know, I think it's nice to have it from time to time. You see, I found you, so.
Yeah, Twitter is, I'm a open access guy on Twitter. It's be lovely to connect with some other good people on there. Yeah, it was great to connect with you, actually, Guillermo. I'm really happy with that connection as well. And it's good that we see things very similarly, because really we're kind of in the minority of a minority here, you know, because we have we're part of a group of people who believe that the world would be better without money, but the vast majority of that group are very much anti-establishment, anti-system, and kind of filled with a lot of hate and anger, which I don't think is useful.
Yeah, you're right.
And of course, another big chunk of them are people who will just talk and actually won't act. So it's interesting times. So I'm glad to have met you, and I hope to meet other people like that on Twitter. It would be really good.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Colin. Thank you so much. You have a good evening. Take care.
Thank you, Guillermo.
Thank you, guys.
Take care. Ciao. Bye.